Check. Welcome to Vinyl Safari. We are now an ASMR podcast, and we will be conducting this conversation like so.
Moist muffin.
Well, anyway, how's that for a cold open? Hello and welcome back to Vinyl Safari. This is a podcast where we talk about all things music, and my name is Sean Patterson. Thank you for joining me. If you are familiar with the podcast, you will have seen or heard several Zoom interviews that I did during the time that shall not be named, which was great fun, honestly, and I'm very thankful that those people all agreed to talk to me, and we had some really cool conversations. Fortunately now, we are in person here at my home studio in Kingston, Ontario, and I am talking today to Dylan Chenier. Dylan is a journalist, actor, cultural enthusiast, music enthusiast, general arts and culture enjoyer here in Kingston, and more importantly than that, he is a very good friend of mine. And today we decided to discuss the topic of whether or not there exists a Kingston music sound. Obviously, this is a big topic. We didn't expect to cover it all in one go, or if there is even necessarily an answer, but it was good fun, and I hope you all enjoy. So, without further ado, here's the episode. Welcome to Vinyl Safari. I'm Sean. With me is...
Dylan, hello.
Dylan Chenier. So, this is, I suppose you could say, a pilot, or... episode 1 of season 2, or
so
the
season premiere.
The all new Vinyl Safari, with the main difference being that we are in person.
Yeah.
I think honestly the first season was good fun, and I thank everybody who took the time to talk to me and everything, but I think we're all over Zoom interviews, so where I can, we will be doing these in person.
It's really cozy here. We spent last weekend watching The Lord of the Rings on your projector.
Yes, the studio is kind of half studio, half vinyl and movie lounge. So we our Christmas present to ourselves was a projector, which we put up on the other half of the studio, and we spent 12 hours last Saturday watching The Lord of the Rings extended editions, which was amazing.
Yeah.
It's an annual thing now. We are already off on a tangent, but that's okay. We're going to be going off on more tangents because this is going to be more conversational and less interview heavy, less question and answer heavy than the previous iteration, because that's just the way I want to do it.
Yeah.
I think I prefer podcasts that are like that, and it's more fun. You've got a drink there. What are you drinking?
I'm drinking quintessential Pabst Blue Ribbon.
Mm-hmm. We're really ringing it in with on a high note here with the cheap beer and the cheap wine. I'm drinking boxed red wine because, well, we
why
won't
not?
go into that.
But, if any local breweries want to donate some complimentary beer for future recordings of this podcast,
see, this is why
we will mention them.
This is why I wanted you on here, because I never would have thought of that.
See?
So if we get free local beer, I'll have you thank.
Come on, hit us up, breweries. You could be on the cutting edge. We're the top vinyl-related podcast in all of Kingston.
We aren't even vinyl-related. We're just talking about music. But you know what? I do at some point want to try and integrate the turntable into this whole thing. As a consequence of not just doing the recorded Zoom meeting, for the time being, we won't have video. Video just takes a lot of time and money and storage space to record good video for a long form podcast, because when you're recording an hour or so of high definition video, it just racks up so quick. So we're just going to do audio for now.
You can picture us in your head, and we can look however you'd like us to look.
Podcasts are meant to be listened to anyway.
I think so. I don't watch podcasts.
Yeah. I mean, it's a shame that we dressed up for this,
really.
even though we don't have the cameras. Where did you get that tuxedo?
Yeah, I bought this at Moore's Fashion for Men.
Right. Well, you look great.
Thank you. You look presentable as well.
Yeah, I thought I would start off this podcast about the Kingston music sound by wearing a t-shirt that isn't a Kingston band, because I'm a fashion genius like that.
Yeah.
I'm wearing an Elevator t-shirt. Elevator are a Canadian band. I think, oh God, I should have looked this up first. I think they're from Hamilton.
Are they
I could be wrong about this.
around?
Oh, yes. Yeah,
Okay.
I actually saw them. We went to see them recently, last year. Actually, it might have been 2 Novembers ago, so just over a year, something like that. They came through and played at Blue Martini, and it was an amazing gig. I found out of them through Hoxley, actually, because he featured in one of their music videos for a brief moment, and I saw him post about them, and they're just phenomenal. I had to buy one of their records. I was able to chat with the lead singer for a little bit after the show. It was just wicked.
Fantastic. That's great.
Have you heard them before?
No, I've never heard them.
Well, you're gonna have to.
I will need to listen.
They're really
Actually,
good.
No, I think you've played them for me now that you
I'm
mentioned
sure I have.
Hamilton and Elevator.
Yes,
I'm
might be wrong about the
remembering this.
Hamilton thing.
Yeah, maybe it was. I don't know, but the Elevator now is ringing.
Can we stop saying elevator? I'm getting some PTSD here.
Oh, are we gonna start this podcast by telling people the elevator story?
Well,
I
why
think
not? We've already
you've
started.
let people on now if we don't tell them what this is all about.
Well, ringing in. So, New Year's Eve 2023. Do you say
No,
New Year's Eve
yeah.
2023 or 2022? Is it the year that you're going into or the year you're finishing?
I think it's the year you're going into. Although,
That
if
makes
you're calling
sense.
it New Year's Eve, maybe just New Year's 2023.
Yeah.
But it was
go
on the
with that.
31st of December 2022.
Yes. I was at your place.
Yes, Brock Towers, we call it.
Brock Towers, yes. And Jessica, the missus, was heading home shortly after midnight because she was just tired and had some stuff she had to do. So I walked her down to the lobby. She jumped into an Uber, and I got back in the elevator. Nothing happened. I pressed the button a few times. I was just it actually took me a good 2 minutes to notice that nothing had happened because I was staring at my phone, and I was probably 5 or 6 drinks in at this point. And yeah, I got stuck in the elevator for over 45 minutes. So I spent nearly the first hour of 2023 stuck in an elevator alone. Thankfully, it didn't move. It was just stuck on the first floor, but the doors wouldn't open. I had to hit the emergency thing and talk to the firemen, and they had to send somebody down. I was thinking, oh my God, New Year's Eve, who the hell is going to be on call for this kind of thing? Thank God there was somebody.
And they got you out.
Yeah.
But it was funny because you had left the party. We just all
I
said
know.
goodbye.
Well,
and then
I had
like,
just enough cell reception to tell Cameron that I was
Yeah.
stuck in the elevator, and he came down, and we were talking through the door, and they tried to get it open from the outside, but the buttons on the outside weren't working either.
No, it took too long.
Technician had to pry it open eventually.
It shows you too that in moments like that, the people in charge really don't know that much, and you're all kind of just figuring it out as you go along. Like the fire department didn't really. I don't think these people had ever gotten someone out of an elevator before, so it took a bit of time, but you got out.
Yeah, I'm very thankful for that. Now, 2 things I'm especially thankful for was thankful for during the moment. I had actually 3 things. I had in my pocket my phone, obviously, put some music on. I think I just listened to, what did I listen to? Between the Beautifuls, Hoxley Workman, one of my favorite albums, because I just needed to chill and make sure I didn't freak out or anything.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I'm not really claustrophobic. I had a bad experience with an elevator when I was about 5 at Loblaws. So I won't go into that,
No.
but I wasn't overly fond of elevators, but it was the kind of thing where every time you go into an elevator, you think, I could get stuck in here. It's
We all
always a
think
possibility.
Yeah.
It happens to people usually once in their life.
What's happened to you now once?
Yeah.
It happens every TV show, movie.
Exactly.
You think this is a very common thing.
Now, I was grateful to have some music. I sat down. I just put the music on. The second thing I had in my pocket, a vape pen. Thank God for that.
Wait, you mean to tell me that you violated the Ontario vaping laws by vaping?
I didn't have a
that
vape
elevator?
pen in my pocket, so
No.
there was obviously nothing going on there. And the other thing I'm really grateful for was I didn't have to take a piss.
Oh,
Could you imagine? And like I said, I was 5 or 6 drinks in at this point. I very well could have. I don't know if I went before I went down or what happened, but I just remember thinking, oh God, if this takes more than an hour or so, I'm gonna have to get real creative, and it's not gonna be pleasant for anybody involved.
Yeah, New Year's Eve, you were very lucky that you visited the facilities before you left the room.
Yeah, you know what I was thinking? Oh God, this is gonna get too graphic. I thought I was wearing like a sweater or something. I thought I could bunch my sweater up in the corner and use it as like a sponge or something like that.
Okay, because I would just think you could pee yourself and then use the sweater to like cover up that area.
No, I wouldn't start by pissing my fucking pants. Jesus. Anyway,
well,
that didn't
you survived
happen.
the day.
Yes, that didn't happen. It was all good. This year, I mitigated all chance of that happening by staying in my house on New Year's Eve, which was great.
Yeah, we had very different New Year's.
What did you get up to?
I was at the Glorious Sons.
Yes. Oh, that's a perfect segue.
New Year's bash.
You're a natural at this.
Well, you know, I'm not that unfamiliar with the world of broadcasting. I once was on the radio at my high school. We went to the same high school. But at KCVI in Kingston, they had, I think this is the only program of its kind in Canada, maybe even in the world, where it was a high school radio station run by students, and it was all for credit. So
91.9 The Cave.
Yeah, The Cave, and it's still around. Anyway, so I did that for two semesters, so I know my way around the microphone differently than you do, but in the spoken word context.
Yeah, I loved it down there. It was really cool. Now, it was, correct me if I'm wrong, there were a lot of people just hanging around.
Yeah.
There wasn't a lot, it wasn't a heavy course load, you could
exactly.
say.
So it's a focus program and you're supposed to take X number of courses, but a lot of the courses are like news writing or radio technology or something like that. And
you get the work done in 20 minutes
exactly,
and then you just sit around.
You sit around listening to music in a classroom that was basically a bigger version of this studio down here.
Yes.
It was very cozy.
It was
couches and carpet.
Chairs, carpets, yeah.
Yeah, a very
posters everywhere,
comfortable ambiance. But most of the time you would walk in, someone would be rolling a joint at the desk, someone would be taking a nap, multiple people probably taking a nap. So not a lot got done, but it was a very valuable hands-on practical experience.
Yeah.
And lots
I had
of fun.
a couple of friends who took the program, so I would end up hanging there on occasion. I was more of a shop geek, so I was in the woodshop wing pretty much for my last 2 years. I took all of the shop related courses that I could, including guitar building, which was awesome. I did that twice. Well, I did it one time as a student, and a second time I was a peer tutor. So that was cool.
Nice.
But yeah. There were wings of the school like that where it was quite cliquey in a sense.
It was. The school itself didn't feel that way, but when you navigated the building, the shop guys had their corner, the radio and the drama nerds had one space, the jocks. It was a big building. Sadly, not a school anymore.
No, now it's KSS.
Yeah, they've moved to the mega high school or something.
Mega high school. Oh God.
Triple the population.
Yeah.
Thank God we got out when we did.
Yeah, I feel very fortunate about that, actually. And on the topic of KCVI, this is not a bad segue either. Well, why don't you do this one? Because you brought in a song, actually. This is the other thing. Spotify, which is the platform that hosts the podcast, well, the way that we upload, rather, they now allow you to play full songs as interstitials in the podcast. So if you're a Spotify Premium listener and we go to a song break, which we will be doing as topics of conversation, examples of things that we're talking about. You will be taken to listen to the song, and then it should seamlessly start up the conversation again right after that. If you are on the free version, it'll only play 30 seconds, as far as I know.
Yeah.
And if you're listening on YouTube or wherever else I post this, just going to be
Google
us.
it.
It's just going to be a hard cut, and we will come back having just listened to a song.
Yeah.
And we'll be talking about it. But, that's the way it goes. So yes, you brought in some songs.
Right, and we had sort of a prompt coming into today, right?
Yes.
So the idea was, what is the Kingston sound, and what are songs? We'll talk about what the Kingston sound is, but what songs fit that, at least your understanding of. So we each brought two. Yes. So I'll start with one of the ones I brought, and I kind of got to thinking of, which bands did I want to include? How did I want to kind of go around thinking about Kingston sound? And I decided I knew I had to have at least one song by the Tragically Hip, the greatest band of all time. I am a diehard Hip fan, so I kind of had to start with that. But I'll tell you that it was very difficult to pick. It wasn't picking my favorite Hip song necessarily, wasn't picking the best Hip song. I wanted to pick the Tragically Hip song that I thought kind of embodied and represented the Kingston sound in a certain way. And I picked 50 Mission Cap. So
Yes.
why
That's
don't we...
my favorite Hip song. I'm
yeah,
glad
you
that
said
picked
that
it.
when we were driving here, and it's definitely up there for me. I don't know if it's not my favorite necessarily, definitely one of my favorites. And it's not explicitly about Kingston, but I think it really represents what the band does really well. It tells a story. They've refined their sound by then, so I think it really is a good representation of the Tragically Hip at their best. And it embodies a lot of what I think we see in the Kingston sound, the Kingston music scene, especially around, the early 90s. So that's kind of why I picked this song for the show.
Cool. Well, we're going to have a listen now, and we will come back shortly thereafter. All right, we're back. So, that's my favorite Hip song.
Interesting.
I think it was near my favorite for a while, and then they opened with it for that last concert in Kingston, and that just sealed the deal for me. It was such an emotional day and evening, and I just remember, like, it was such a Canadiana moment, and I look back on it, and it just, like, for me, that's the quintessential, like, Hip song.
No, absolutely, and I think they cemented that legacy as it being one of, if not their best song, at least their best live song. But just being in that moment in that arena, the way the show started, coming up with that song, that was the best way to start that night. And it just watching Gord in his element. Had you not known the history of that year and what he was going through, you would have just thought it was another Hip concert, because he was just in his element. And
God, and the set list was just amazing.
A greatest hits, if there ever was one, was performed that night, and it was just amazing to be there to witness that.
Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah.
Where did you watch that concert?
Okay, so I was in the arena in then what was then called the K-Rock Center. And I was in a box next to the Prime Minister.
Seriously?
Yeah, the box we were sitting in for that night was next to where they had Justin Trudeau sitting, because he was at the show.
All right, we're not getting political on this podcast.
Just saying, was
kidding.
there. It was.
I know he was there.
Just such the weirdest.
I
most
didn't know.
Canadian
I didn't realize you were
moment in my
at
life.
the show.
Oh yeah,
I watched the CBC broadcast in someone's backyard. It was projected in a massive tent. It was like they had a big party.
Oh, wonderful.
It was great. But I didn't realize you were there. Maybe you told me that
I feel
in the past,
like that was one of those days where no matter how you watched that concert, you were in that moment living one of your most Canadian moments.
Yeah, I gave myself a tattoo on that day.
Awesome.
Yeah, my buddy Lucas, who is going to be on the podcast at some point soon too. He's a stick and poke master. He taught me how to do it, and
I got to talk to him.
I gave myself a tattoo, Ilske, which is Danish for love or lover, on my leg, because I have some Danish heritage, and it just felt like that kind of day. We were day drinking. It was the whole thing. It was a whole marathon of a day, really. And that was, now I have that memory permanent in my on my skin and in my memory.
Yeah,
there
exactly.
You go. So, more specifically about the song, I want to know your thoughts, because we're kind of we framed this around the Kingston sound, and I don't know if this is maybe a foregone conclusion already, that we're going to come to the end and be like, well, I guess there isn't really a Kingston sound, or we don't know what it is. But there are reasons why I wanted to pose this question, and reasons why I wanted to talk to you about it, because you are an avid music listener and concert goer in the city. You have your ear to the ground for the arts and culture scene here in general. And I feel, as someone on the inside of the scene, that I don't really see the full picture all the time. And I just see snapshots of it, or a very specific sort of side of the scene, and I don't necessarily feel like I have the same kind of perspective. But just listening to that 50 Mission Cap, how do you see that in the context of the Kingston sound, or how do you hear it rather?
Yeah. So when you first posed that question and thinking about what hip song I wanted to pick in particular, there was a few I had thought of, but I kept coming back to 50 Mission Cap mainly because the era in which it's from, to me, is quintessential Tragically Hip, 1993. It's from Fully Completely, which is one of their best records, most complete artistic records. But from, thinking about Kingston's sound and the Tragically Hip, I knew I wanted to pick a song that was kind of representative of the Tragically Hip's kind of take on what was in the early to mid 90s, like that modern Canadian rock, kind of in common with the indie scene, delving into that. It could play on the modern contemporary rock stations. It's a sound that I think when you hear it, you recognize the era, it's from North America, that kind of sound, whether it be within the Canadian indie scene, the Canadian modern rock scene, which I think, as we start to talk about the Kingston sound and thinking about a lot of the influential artists here in Kingston today and in the 90s, it's a similar style, and I think the Tragically Hip kind of played a big role in shaping what that sounded like in Canada and in Kingston. And this record is kind of part of that journey. It's not necessarily very early Tragically Hip. They had worked through a lot of stuff on their first albums, kind of working through figuring out their sound. They had a lot of success previously with Road Apples, which is another great album, but coming into Fully Completely, the band is really, they're fully realized who they are, and this sound fully completely the Tragically Hip. And this sound is the most heard in 50 Mission Cap, in Fully Completely as a record.
Yeah, I agree. I just had a thought there as you were talking about the North American music and things like that. Do you feel like Canadian music in general has more DNA from American rock music or British?
That's a hard question, and I think
because we are, in a sense, still a British colony, though we're not.
Yeah.
I mean, basically in name only, but
well, exactly.
I feel like surely there would be some kind of an influence there, I would have thought.
I think, at least from the way I listen to this sort of music, to me the Tragically Hip often gets compared to bands like REM, that kind of American sound. And I think in the era in Canada, there was a lot of overlap. A lot of Canadian artists were able to find success in the United States because we're so close. I do think as the decades went on, maybe if you asked about, Canadian music in the 70s, there might be more influence from Europe, from Britain, but I think by the time the Tragically Hip are recording Fully Completely, there's more connection, more overlap between Canadian rock and the United States.
Yeah.
The Hip would tour a lot of times throughout the US. Some stuff Canadian bands would record a lot in the States, and were able to tour.
Yeah, I think you're right. I kind of knew the answer before asking the question, but it's something that I haven't really heard talked about that much in terms of Canadian music as a whole. I think obviously our proximity to the States and our ties to their cultural artifacts and movements is so tight. You can't really get away from it. Now, I'm a massive, I love British music. I'm kind of an Anglophile when it comes to like the arts and culture from Britain, and I kind of am always curious to see if I can find any bits of that DNA in Canadian music, and you do see it flare up here and there. But I think by and large, it's probably more akin to American style, especially in rock and roll. Although, you can't talk about American rock and roll without talking British invasion and everything. So it's all kind of linked.
And funnily enough, I mean, this album was recorded in England. So clearly, the band wanted to, I think, tap into some of that rich cultural history by taking themselves and moving away from Canada for a little bit and getting that international experience. So I think definitely some influence from Britain, but I would say more along the lines of what was happening in the US around that time, but in Canada, always a few years later.
Yeah. Yeah. Sweet.
Yeah.
That's great. I don't know if there was anything more I wanted to really touch on with regards to that song in particular.
I wanted to just mention too, in terms of like the subject matter, like Kingston, if we're talking about Kingston's sound, you know, Kingston is such a city with that rich history and in a lot of art, an attachment to telling stories about history. And this song does that so well. And that's another thing that Gord Downie, especially in his writing and the band, did often tell stories with their music. And I think this song really does that well. It tells a story, you know, it has that military connection, which is evident in Kingston too. This isn't necessarily a story about Kingston, but there's a lot that's relatable. You got the connection to the Toronto Maple Leafs. Kingston, I think, is a big Leaf fan, much to your chagrin, Sean. So yeah, I just think it represents a lot of relevant and relatable content for Kingston listeners, especially. And I think that's why it is such a popular song amongst local hip fans too.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like pure Canadiana, that song in particular.
Oh, yeah.
And the hip in general. Yeah, awesome. We've covered this song a few times as well. It's one of my favorite songs to rock out to, especially because that outro, they really are just sort of jamming towards the end. It's like a 2-chord jam, which is like, my bread and butter when it comes to live improv and stuff. Anytime that we get the opportunity to just settle into a 2-chord jam for a couple of minutes and rock out, it's always fun by me. And I love doing that. And that song is such a fun song to rip on. And it's a great chorus too. Like,
oh yeah,
I've been, again, as we were kind of leading up to this subject matter, I was trying to figure out for myself how I would approach this, like the whole Kingston idea of a Kingston sound. And one thing I definitely noticed, at least within the rock and indie rock sphere, thinking of the Hip, the Sons, current bands like Cassador Wilderness, Oak Ridge Avenue. There's a lot of focus on big singable choruses,
right?
And that's not new. Obviously, that's something that's existed in rock for since the dawn of it as a genre. But there's something about the group vocal style, like really hooky chorus thing, like not overly complicated in terms of lyrical input, things like that. Like the kind of things that just get into your brain and into your ears and under your skin, and you can feel it and really understand the music because it resonates and it's memorable, and it's like they're not even like obvious like poppy choruses all of the time, but they're hooks in their own way, in their own right. Like something like I think 50 Mission Cap is a good example of that, actually, because it's not it's the melody's kind of all over the place. He's throwing up to a high register and then going down to a very low register, and it kind of bounces back and forth between Gord and Paul singing. But it just, you hear it once and you're like, you get it. It's there, you know? I don't know. I'm just kind of waffling on now, but
I think it's a song that anyone who's heard it once or twice can at least sing along to the chorus, and it's such a recognizable lyric that you can sing along to, and there's a reason, that's popular, and there's a reason audiences like that. I think if you're looking at even modern Kingston bands, you said I've noticed as someone who goes to a lot of concerts, bands really wanting to forge a connection with the audience, and if you can write songs that are, good quality and sound really good, but also have recognizable lyrics and things that people can sing along to, that's only going to help people forge a connection to your music, feel like they're part of something when they go see a concert, and they can feel like they're making that connection between themselves and the artist on stage. So I think that's, the Tragically Hip did that really well, and there's a reason they had great live shows. No matter what tour you saw them on or when, they always put on a good concert. And part of that was because they had such recognizable and loved songs that people enjoyed singing along to.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I know we were going to go back and forth for songs. I haven't actually picked mine, so I'm gonna throw this to you again because you did bring another song, and actually I think this is a good segue because we can genre bend a little bit here. Obviously, the Kingston music scene is not just a rock and roll scene. There's a lot more to it, and I think and I mentioned this briefly in the car on the way here. One of the things I think that is unique about Kingston, because of its size, is that you don't get quite a subdivision of genres and scenes within the city. When I first started out, I was playing with heavy metal bands, rappers, punk bands, all kinds of things, and I was often doing like, solo acoustic stuff at these same shows that were playing with metal bands and things like that. The scene just has so much cross-pollination in it in a way that you think about Toronto, Montreal, or whatever, these massive metro cities, they don't have the same thing because their scenes are big enough individually to kind of have their own culture within the scene. You can be really big in the hip hop scene or the rock scene or whatever in a city like that, and still, you're not going to be necessarily the Toronto sound or known, across the city in the same way that a band in Kingston would if they get to that sort of breakout velocity. And then they kind of become part of the zeitgeist of bands that you think of and artists that you associate with the scene. And Kingston is unique in that way, I think. And on the topic of going slightly outside of rock and roll, what was it, the Gertrudes that you wanted to put on? Yeah,
my next song is by the Gertrudes, and it's off of a record that they put out a couple of years ago, Emergency to Emergency.
Yeah.
And the song is called Headlines.
Great choice. So let's give it a spin.
Take a listen.
What?
You remember the song?
Of course, we just listened to it.
Right. We didn't sit around talking about what's going to come next in the podcast for 10 minutes.
No, of course we wouldn't do that. We run a tight ship here at Vinyl Safari.
Everything happens so naturally here.
Yeah. So that was pretty sweet. I'd never heard that song before.
Oh, really?
Now, I must say, I like the Gertrudes a lot, everything I've heard. I just haven't dived in yet.
So have you, as someone who's been around the Kingston music scene, have you ever seen them live at all?
Yes, though I've not been to a full show.
Okay. You must see them live. They are phenomenal.
Yes, this I've heard.
One of the best live bands you can see in town, just because there's so much to see and hear. Like that band, they call themselves a folkestra, or I think they were described as that.
That's a great way to put it.
Folkestra, and it really is. There's, I think, over a dozen people on stage at a given moment, and like, they'll have a few people kind of come and go from song to song. Like there's a lot of changeovers from each tune, but it's a great live show. And for the last couple of years since they released this album, they've been playing Headlines at their shows. And that song with the chorus, Greg Tilson, the lead singer, always gets the audience, no matter where the show is, to sing along to that chorus. And it's quite a fun and interactive part of the show.
Yeah.
So
it's a good touchback to what we were saying about singable choruses.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And it's I think for them it works because it's such a chaotic band, but there's so much going on and so much that you can maybe relate to when you go to a show of theirs if you play an instrument or whatever. But and there's so many different genres on offer. So really anyone who's going to a Gertrude show or listening to their music, I think they can get something from it and some form of enjoyment of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what they do really well. And for me, that's why they're very much representative of the Kingston sound, just from the way they're able to represent and include so many different genres. And people too. Yeah.
You described it earlier as something of a super group.
Oh yeah, I think definitely.
Which is totally true.
Yeah, like a Kingston super group, in that there are so many of the artists in the Gertrudes do work with other bands. They have solo projects. You can find them all over town contributing to the music scene, and that's really representative, I think, of how the Kingston, at least from an outsider's perspective, like it does look like there is a lot of collaboration amongst Kingston musicians. There's not, I mean, I'm sure in our heads there's some form of competition or friendly competition, but really for the most part, everyone gets along and kind of supports each other. And I think this band represents that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And would you say, like, as someone who's part of that scene, do you feel like that's true? Like, it is a very collaborative. Like, I just saw you did a show before Christmas where it was, you were part of a group that was playing a tribute to the Weaker Thans, and it was really so many different artists took part in that show.
Absolutely. No, that's totally right, and that's actually good. See, this is why I had you on here. You really should be in radio, because you're much better at making these segues than I am. That was a great night, and I think the reason I didn't bring it up was because I don't remember a lot of the end of it. My memory is foggy on that one, but yeah, that was wicked, and you really can, like, that was a testament for me to the willingness of people in the scene to just say yes to things, you know. Joe and Harrison and Adam, who were sort of the core trio of that particular outfit, they came up with the idea, and they were like, well, we can't do this all on our own, even though they did most of the heavy lifting. And they reached out to a whole bunch of other people and said, hey, do you want to sing this song? Do you want to play guitar on this song? Do you want to play keys and just sort of, you know, have some fun and do this Weaker Thans tribute night? And everybody said yes. And suddenly we had this thing going. And it was so much fun. And you make really good connections too. Like these are the kinds of people that you're friendly with and that you know to some degree, and that you see out on the scene and at shows and all these things. And it's a whole new thing when you actually get in the room with them and start playing with them, and you see where the connection can go from being, you know, a cordial acquaintance to somebody that you really want to work with for something in the future. Because I mean, it's just sort of the way I think as well. Generally, is as I find somebody who's really good at what they do, I'm like, ooh, I want to be a part of that. You know, I want to see what we could do together. You know, and I think there's a lot of that in the city.
Yeah, I think, and I believe that extends beyond music as well. Like, as it to other artistic communities, I do a lot in theater in town, and it's certainly a very similar vibe within the local theater community of, you know, how can we support each other? And what can we learn from each other? Mm-hmm. And Kingston, really, ultimately, it's a music city, but it's also an artistic city, really, I think.
Yeah. You can't even really peg it down in any particular type of art. It is just an artsy city, which is amazing. It's one of the many reasons I love it here. And I lived in Toronto for a while too, and Toronto has its virtues, to be sure. It didn't quite agree with me in terms of my own temperament and what I was looking for in a city. And I also it's one of those cities where you really have to grab the bull by the horns, you know, if you want to do the Toronto arts scene. You have to be the kind of person that can manage it and can really make the best of that. And for me, there was something more appealing about having the consistency and the closeness of the Kingston scene. Like I would hate to have to make friends, air quotes, or acquaintances for the purpose of trying to get something out of them or trying to get another connection through somebody or whatever. I don't feel like there's that much of that in Kingston. Everybody's kind of only 1 or 2 degrees away from each other.
Yep.
And it's pretty easy to get friendly with somebody and engage them to work with you.
Yeah, and it doesn't require a lot of networking. Like, you maybe, as you're new to the scene, it takes a little bit of time to kind of get up to speed and meet the right people, but for the most part, once you know your way around the city and have done things within that artistic community, you develop those connections really quickly. Yeah. And it's a great network of artists and cross collaboration amongst different genres within certain artistic disciplines. A lot of artists who do multiple disciplines. I mean, theater and music go hand in hand quite a bit. We're seeing a lot of collaboration in the city between the music community and the film industry that's popping up. Like, it's such a collaborative city, and that collaboration is felt musically quite a bit.
Yeah, absolutely it is. Should we play another song?
Yeah. What have you made your mind up yet?
Yes, I did.
Okay,
in the
great.
interim, I did.
You did
Yes.
during
I'm
the time we were talking.
Yes, I'm terribly indecisive when it comes to this kind of thing. This is why I never get asked to DJ parties or being in control of the aux cable, because I will stew over trying to get the perfect song.
Too much pressure for you to pick.
And I just don't have a big enough list of showstoppers to play, knowing that they're all going to go down well while I try and find the perfect song.
Right.
I'm not cut out for that kind of thing.
No.
I get far too pensive about it. This is why I like having parties with 2 or 3 people where we're all down to listen to really weird, obscure, depressing, or incredibly intense lyrical music. like Lucas, my buddy, he's going to come on the podcast soon, and we're going to do an episode entirely dedicated to Bon Iver.
Nice.
Because the amount of times we have gotten together and just listened to Bon Iver for hours. It's great. I love it. And we do that kind of thing, like Radiohead, The Smiths recently, and just going whole hog into a specific artist or scene or something like that. I love that kind of thing. So if it comes to DJing a party where you want variety and you want to keep people kind of moving and the energy up, unfortunately, I'm just so bad at that. It's a shame, really.
Is that common amongst musicians, do you think, or is that just unique to you?
I don't know. I mean, no, it can't be common to musicians. I'm sure there are many musicians who are good at doing that sort of thing. I know that depending on the company that you're keeping, you can have as much fun and have as engaging a time doing the more obscure music with close friends and stuff. We do that in Oak Ridge when we're hanging out and just drinking. Yeah. We do that all the time. Yeah. We'll just pass the phone around, whoever's connected to the Bluetooth, and it's you put on 1 or 2 songs in the queue, and then you pass it to the next person. And the playlist just evolves throughout the night as people's choices change and they get influenced by what other people are choosing. It's a lot of fun, that.
Yeah, those are I've been to some of those get-togethers, mm-hmm. and it's quite a lot of fun because you get to share the music you like and listen to what other people enjoy.
Yeah, and you can never predict the playlist. No. As soon as it goes from 1 or 2 people past you, the style has changed, the genre has changed, the mood has changed. It's hard to even know what you're going to put on by the time it gets back around you in the circle. It's good fun. I think I would like to play some Julia Finnegan, if you're good with that.
Absolutely.
Now, Julia came on the podcast with me back in the Zoom days shortly after she put this record out. I think it's I don't know if it was her first full record. I think it was. Certainly the only full record she's put on recently, though I think she's put out some singles. And she's just... I love her songwriting style. It's really, really good. And her voice is so unique. And this album in particular, I just really, really gravitated towards. So I thought we would play... What would we play? There are if you haven't heard it yet, the album is Listen to the Wallflowers. Came out in 2020. I think it was December 2020. So really right at the beginning of the podcast. She might have been the second guest or third guest. I can't remember. Let's do something. Do you want something like minor key or major key?
Let's go with some minor key.
Minor? Okay. Let's do Listen to the Wallflowers, and the title track on the album. It's a good one.
Sounds great.
And we're back.
Some Julia Finnegan.
Yeah. What do you think? So you... Correct me if I'm wrong, you weren't as familiar with Julia's work, eh?
I think I've heard most of it sporadically. You've played some stuff of hers, and I've seen her live a few times. Mm-hmm. But I think most times I've seen her live, it's just been her on the acoustic guitar solo. So with this recording, I got kind of the full band experience, and it was really good. I quite liked that song.
Yeah. It's great.
Yeah.
That whole album is very well written, and it's incredibly well produced, which is one thing I meant to mention on the Gertrude song. And it is something that I've actually noticed on all 3 of the ones we've listened to, is the production is unbelievably good. And it complements the styles really well. Obviously, to the best of my knowledge, none of these were recorded in the same place.
No.
But
well, if we're talking about the Kingston sound, I would just say that we spend probably a lot of time talking about the musicians, but
yes,
such a big part of that is also the technicians and the producers.
Well, that was the next thing I was going to get onto. Like I don't know, like I said, like the 3 that we've played, I don't know exactly where they were all recorded. But I do know that within certainly the indie music scene in Kingston, there's a lot of stuff that happens between a handful of studios and producers and engineers. The things that come to mind immediately, Bathhouse, obviously.
Absolutely.
And you've got North of Princess.
Yep.
I think about Isabel Bader as well. They've done some really cool stuff there recently.
Yep. Wolf Island Records.
Yes. Absolutely.
Just on the island there, like there's a lot of recording happening throughout the city, and I think that enables, as I'm sure you can relate to, it enables local bands, especially emerging artists. It allows them to have studio space and time to record, where if you were trying to make it in a bigger city where you were competing in Toronto, say, you probably would have a harder time finding that space. But in Kingston, I think for a city of our size, we have an impressive number of studios available for recording.
Yeah.
For local artists.
And they're accessible too.
Yeah.
Like it's not like you're going to spend, thousands and thousands of dollars to spend a day or two or a weekend in these studios. Obviously they're not all the same, but the same can be said for a lot of places in Toronto, these high-end studios where, first of all, the rent and overhead is just way higher and way different. So you do see a lot of indie artists recording at studios that are really well equipped to handle their stuff. And if anything is going to produce a Kingston sound in the long run, something like the producers, engineers, and studios in the city will contribute to that quite a bit, I would think. Now, obviously, it's funny that we say that because of the choices we played. Well, did you say you knew where the Gertrudes one was recorded?
Yeah, the Gertrudes was from Wolf Island.
Okay, yes, so that's a good example.
Yeah, and exactly. I would also say that the hip maybe not as much in their later days, but if we're talking about the sort of technical side of that Kingston sound, in terms of listening to the recordings, a major element of that is the studios, but also all of these songs so far, I think there's a lot to talk about the artists performing them live as well. And I think Kingston also has a very strong group of sound technicians at live concerts. And if you look at like the Tragically Hip credits, a lot of those engineers and technicians from the early days of their band in helping them develop that sound. The Gertrudes, they play in some of the really prominent Kingston venues. I saw them play the Isabel a couple years ago, and just the sound in that venue and what they've been able to engineer in that space is so remarkable. Julia as well is sort of part of that scene, and you can hear really the quality of that those individuals when they mix the sound at these concerts, whether it be at bars in town or at the Broom Factory, which is a space Julie is part of as well.
Yeah. Aaron Holmberg, who I think he still is, but for a long time, I mean, he was a technician at the Bathhouse, and now I think does production at Isabel Bader, and he at least was there for the two times that Oak Ridge played there. And I mean, his capacity to record sound just across the board is incredible. He's great in the studio. He's great in a live context. If you get him to record a live set and then do post-production, you're getting the best of both worlds. And we've worked with him for live recordings a bunch. And he's one that I would count among the group of people sort of in on the back end of things, the ones that you don't maybe think of immediately when you're talking about the Kingston sound. They're not artists necessarily, but the type of people who make the kind of music that we are listening to possible and put their fingerprint on it.
Yeah, they're the unsung heroes of
exactly
that industry.
Yeah,
absolutely.
for sure. So on the topic of music recorded in Kingston, now I was going to say the irony about the songs we picked with regards to production is that I was going to say 1 out of the 4 that we're going to play was recorded locally, but I think it'll be 2 out of the 4 because I'm going to be more tactful about my choice. Now, I don't mean to be a heel. We're going to play an Oak Ridge Ave song just because I think for the reasons of being transparent. I am in the band, obviously.
Wait, hold on.
But
you're that Sean Patterson?
Okay, fuck off. But I just think because like I've been in this scene for like 14 years, 15 years. No, it's got to be 15.
When was your first gig?
Well, it depends on whether you stipulate if I'm being paid or not.
First like
I mean, I busked. Here's the thing. I busked in Market Square for years. Right. That was like one of my summer jobs, really.
Nice. Another rich part of Kingston's history is that street musician scene.
Absolutely. And I cut my teeth there. That's how I got over playing in front of people. I learned to do it then. I learned to sing really loud, which I still do. Yes. I'm a belter. I can't do the soft kind of gentle thing. I'm working on it. The studio is helping me in that front actually, but it's still not quite there. But what was I going to say? So we made a record over the last, well, it's been 2 years now, but it was 18 months in the making, give or take, with Hawksley, my musical hero. Now we made most of that record in Peterborough, but there's one song that was recorded in Kingston.
One, really?
And engineered, produced by our own Thomas Draper, who will be on the podcast at some point soon too. Now he plays guitar in the band, and he's also a whiz when it comes to engineering and producing music. So we basically did everything we could to recreate Hawksley's studio in Thomas's basement on a budget.
So that's awesome. I honestly did not know that.
Really?
I don't think, maybe you mentioned it, but I feel like I'm learning this for the first time.
Wow.
And I know a lot about what's going on with this band, so maybe I'm not paying attention when you talk, but okay, I'm excited to find out what it is.
So basically the thing was we recorded a 10-song album. For whatever reason, there was one song on the record that all 4 of us were just feeling slightly less confident about, and we thought, can we get one more in under the wire? I wrote the song, I made a demo of it in like a day. I sent it to the guys. I said, do you think we can make this work? Thomas is like, yep, let's do it. This is just the right kind of speed and style to fit the bill. And he said, I think we can manage it if we get some of this gear that we need. We rented a Neumann U87 microphone, the nicest microphone in the world by many standards. It's the one we used on the rest of the album as well. We got an 1176 compressor, a preamp. We got a Strymon Iridium, which is what we recorded all the guitars through. And we basically just, in microcosm, recreated Hawk's studio in Thomas's. And Thomas, killed it. He totally killed it. We were also working with the mastering engineer at the time, who was giving him pointers on how to get it into the zone so that he could make it seamlessly blend into the rest of the album. But together, the two of them just knocked it out of the park, which I'm very grateful for. And it's also for me, I don't know why. I'm proud of the song because it came together so quickly, and it was just a moment of inspiration at a time of need, really. Like, a lot of the songs came out of inspiration where, you have the luxury of time to write and work on something, and this thing came together in no time at all, which I think you can kind of feel in the timbre of the song. Do you know what song it is? Could you guess?
No.
No,
I'm going to be wrong, so I'm not going to embarrass myself. But if it's what I think it is.
Well, I'm also picking it just because I think on the whole topic of the Kingston sound, I think it actually will fit well with the rest of the ones we've listened to. It's a little bit less synth heavy as some of the other stuff on the record. because obviously we were, I mean, well into like British new wave and crazy 80s stuff that we were listening to at the time. But this one in particular, I think is a good example of what we're talking about. It's Baby Don't Self-Destruct.
Not what I thought.
From our record, Wind Up, Let Go, which we put out in September. Stream it.
All right,
let's go. Thoughts, Dylan?
What a banger.
Oh, cheers, mate.
No, that was like, I've heard that song a million times, but just listening.
Have you heard it a million times?
Okay, maybe not a million.
We don't have a million streams on Spotify, so if you're listening somewhere else,
I've probably listened to it a dozen times in the last year. But, you know, hearing you playing it live every time you do, it's a great song live.
It's one of my favorite ones to play live.
Yeah, it's really high energy, but just sitting here listening to that song, I really got into it, and the vibe was there. It fits, it complements a lot of the other songs on the record quite well, but I also think it kind of stands on its own a little bit as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And knowing now the history of recording that and comparing it to the other songs, you would never know that was the only one that was not recorded with the rest.
No, that is the best part, in my opinion, about it. Like that was the most exciting thing to me, just about the whole concept of trying to do something like that. We didn't actually tell Hawksley at the time. We were kind of a little worried about it in some sense, because he helped us record this album, and we're like, is he going to be annoyed if we put a song on that we made ourselves? But the thing is, throughout the whole process, Hawksley was very encouraging about us doing our own production anyway. And Thomas and I were studying like mad, watching him over his shoulder for the whole process. So finding out that we could do that and make it work was a huge confidence boost for us. And I mean, Thomas is going to be in the music production business for a long time, I think. I think it's fair to say. He's obviously an incredibly talented musician, and he's going to be doing that, till his hands fall off. But he's got an incredible future in that as well. I am trying to work on my production chops, as I'm sure you know. We're sitting in my first home studio, so I'm still sort of learning the ropes. But even being part of it with Thomas making that song, I was taking notes. I was trying to contribute the best I could, doing my Hawksley impression. No, I don't do a Hawksley impression. I was trying to think like that. You get to know somebody like that and watch them work for cumulatively probably 100 or so hours, and you start to realize how their decision making works, right, and stuff like that. That's a very muso tangent to go on, but it is part of the sound.
Absolutely. And I think as a music fan, not necessarily a musician, I don't really have that additional knowledge when I'm listening to a song, so it's good to hear I'm really fascinated with the process that goes into making the songs and recording them.
Yeah.
And I think it adds a whole other context that you don't even realize.
That's true.
So that's really cool.
Yeah.
One of the questions I had for you, if we're kind of connecting that song choice to the topic of the show and this Kingston sound. So for people who don't know about me, I do a lot of journalism locally, a lot of writing, some freelance work, and I've had the opportunity to interview some musicians, and I've always wanted to interview you, Sean, but just never had the right opportunity without it seeming kind of like,
weird because we're friends.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No,
and I sell merchandise at Oak Ridge concerts.
Yes. This is what they call in the business a conflict of interest, I believe.
Potentially. So I've never really interviewed you, but one of the questions
this is why I'm having you on my podcast. Exactly. It's slightly more above board.
Yeah, exactly. But one of the questions I always wanted to ask, or conversation to delve into with you, and I'm curious, in terms of your approach as a musician, and then looking at the work you've done with Oak Ridge and the recordings the band has been able to put together within the last year now, I'm curious to hear how you're influenced by the Kingston sound, if you will, or what's happened musically in Kingston. Like, what were the local influences on your career?
there are tons. I mean, the funny thing is, I find it kind of hard to pin down specifically because I've kind of always been swimming in that pool, you know? Like I don't really I'm not seeing molecules of water. I'm just seeing the water, the entire thing, you know? Um, it kind of it rubs off on you in ways that you don't even realize. But I've gotten to play with and learn from some of the best musicians in the city, and I think, in my opinion, some of the best musicians in Canada. Like there are so many. The great musician per capita ratio in Kingston is amazing.
Oh yeah.
So I took guitar lessons from people who are in incredible bands. You know, I jamming with people who are in incredible bands, and being in studio with people who have made incredible music. It's just, God, who I'm trying to think of. I'm stalling because I'm trying to think of specific instances that would want to mention. I mean, for me, when I first joined Oak Ridge, it was the Toucan, Rocket Surgery.
Right.
They were still the main the regular band every Monday, and we would go to those shows all the time. Like we lived on that. Bunny, who plays sax with Ruben, is Harrison's uncle, and they're very close, and they're a very musical family, and he plays in tons of bands. So we would just, we were always hearing stories and hanging out with those guys, and so that in the early days really rubbed off. Just sort of the culture of the downtown music scene in Kingston. I really learned there at the Toucan with them, and all those guys are still playing in bands around town. Most of them are in like 3 or 4 different bands. It's kind of insane.
You can go to the Toucan any given weekend and see a handful of those guys.
And there's Eli on bass, who is touring with Tara Lightfoot all the time. You got Rob Radford on drums, just a killer drummer. Harrison actually, Rob makes his own snare drums, and Harrison has one of them. Robbie gifted it to him before we went on tour, and it was either before we went on tour or before we went into the studio with Ian. No, it was the tour. It was 2018 summer, I think. Anyway, and it's still his go-to snare. He plays it almost every show, or it's there at almost every show at least. And we've recorded with it all over the place. That's the other thing. Like, there's also an overlap for some reason, which I still don't fully understand, between musicians and craftspeople too.
Yes. Oh yeah.
Tradespeople, people who are creative. I mean, how many drummers build their own drums? It's very few.
Yeah.
I know a few guitarists who've built their own guitars, but even that is, there's a higher incidence of that in Kingston than there would be in most cities, because we had a guitar building program. And
Kingston is
that was an insanely unique thing, building an electric guitar in high school.
So if I got to do radio in high school, you got to build guitars.
Yes. I feel so fortunate having been able to do that.
We went to a good high school.
Yeah, like what the hell? Yeah. Anyway, I feel like we should probably wrap this up soon. We're going on.
We could literally continue.
An hour.
I'm thinking like this. What is the Kingston sound? This should be a regular series.
I think yes, we can come back to this. We're gonna have to.
Because we really haven't defined it yet.
No, and I don't know if we will.
Like I said,
I wondered if it was maybe a foregone conclusion, but it is a very interesting topic to discuss as people who are in that world. Sometimes we don't pull back and reflect on things like that, and sometimes you don't get to recognize how grateful you can be for such a thing in your life, and I certainly am.
Yeah, I think we maybe risk taking it for granted.
Yes.
Sometimes, at least in Kingston, I know I've gone elsewhere, and it's not as it is. As someone who loves music, like I can go out any given night, any night you can see a band somewhere.
Music. Yeah,
and they're very talented. So
exactly.
That's something we really should support too. And I think that's the ultimate thing. As music lovers, we have to make sure that we are supporting this industry, because without the support of people going to gigs, buying the merchandise, listening to the music, the industry wouldn't be where it is.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, shall we cheers to that?
Cheers. Thank you for listening too. And it was fun being on this episode.
Yeah. Well, I'll have you back for sure.
Back.
We can do this regularly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Continue the conversation later.
Awesome.
Peace out.
Take care.
Thank you so much for your time and attention on this episode of Vinyl Safari. Once again, my name is Sean Patterson. If you liked what you heard, please consider sharing the podcast around, giving us a like or a follow or a rating. It really does make a difference, and it helps us to know what you like, what you don't, and what we can improve on for next time. So, once again, thank you very much for listening, and we will see you on the next Vinyl Safari.